Welcome to another episode of A Gamer Looks at 40. My name is Bill Tucker, and straight talk, y'all love your Game Boys. Like, legit love your Game Boys. Just to give you a quick bit of background on how the show is done, usually by the time the show hits the site and hits your podcatcher of choice, it's about 4 to 5 weeks old. These things get made well in advance. That way, if life happens, I still have recordings to release and not have a break or a gap in the schedule. And between when the first Game Boy show was produced and completed until now, I've had so many conversations about the Game Boy. I mean, it's been crazy. You still continue to talk about it, which is awesome. So we're going to go down this rabbit hole again. We're going to talk about the Game Boy. We're going to talk about the Game Gear, a little bit about the Lynx, which I forgot was a thing. A lot of talk about Link's Awakening. I mean, y'all love some Link's Awakening just as much as you love Game Boy. I do too. Top 3 Zelda game for me. It's a absolute delight and treat. And just a whole bunch of other games that connected with us as kids. So time to get back into the car because we have another 100 miles further down the Game Boy highway. Not content with just talking about his Game Boy, Ryan from RGB High Score on Twitch tells us a bit about his Game Gear and how much he loved it. Let's find out. Did you have any of the other portable consoles like the Game Gear? And
I did have a Game Gear. I did.
You had a Game Gear. Okay.
Yes.
You're officially the second person I've talked to in these series of interviews that's had a Game Gear. Did you Game Boy versus Game Gear? What was who kind of won out in your hands?
Game Boy, hands down.
Okay.
Much better games on the Game Boy, for sure.
Were there any highlights on the Game Gear?
So interestingly enough, like my favorite games on the Game Gear were really like throwaway titles. So I played a lot of Riddick Bow Boxing on it. And,
I don't know why that makes me laugh.
Oh, it's not a great boxing game by any stretch of the imagination, but there's like an RPG element, which you're building levels and stuff as you kind of progress yourself.
Are you serious? That's actually really innovative for the era. It's like
right,
a fight
but
night.
It's flat. You don't see anything from like the waist down as well. So it's just just sideways punches, and it's not a good look. I mean. When Punch Out that came out on the NES was a better game than Riddick Bow Boxing.
Just do that, guys. I mean, the formula is there. That's funny. So it's kind of like a side by side, but yeah, you couldn't really dodge. It's just basically a punch fest, Rock'em Sock'em Robot style.
Yep, exactly. Rock'em Sock'em Robots is a perfect analogy for that.
That sounds really, really bad, and it has Riddick Bow's name on it. Mr. Bow, you should have put your name to something a little better. I guess Punch Out was taken. What else on the Game Gear did you end up playing?
I did Axe Battler, which one time I actually ended up beating on a ferry ride from I think Seattle to British Columbia.
Okay.
And there was Choplifter, if I remember right, a Space Harrier.
Ooh, Space Harrier.
I think we had Rystar, which I found out is I think pronounced Ristar now. I don't know.
Pronunciation, language is fluid. Let's just forget about the pronunciation and just say it the way you want it, right? I don't know. I always said Rystar, but that's a pretty neat little platformer, right? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's great because you get to utilize like the springy arms from Rystar to either grip onto things, move yourself across that, or use it as an attack. So it's a lot of fun.
Not to be outdone by Ryan, Joey shares some stories about not only the Game Boy and the Game Gear, but the Atari Lynx. Like I said in the open, forgot that was a thing. Kindly reminded by Mr. Joe Coro. Let's listen in. Yeah, now, here's a question, though, because, again, I knew you had the Game Gear. I forgot you had the Lynx. Did you find yourself playing those a lot? Because I know Game Boy dominates everyone's conversation. It's hard to hear people talk about the Game Gear during that time.
Sure.
What were you playing on Game Gear and Lynx even more? Those systems are considered not failures because the Game Gear had a good base, but the Lynx was not well regarded.
No, the Lynx wasn't. The Lynx, again, Atari suffered from third-party support. Game Gear was better because at the time they had Capcom at least, so you had Sonic, you had Altered Beast, you had your Sega first-party software, which again wasn't as pronounced and prominent as Nintendo's all-star cast of mascots. But you had 3 or 4 good games. Outrun, Hang On. There was about 3 or 4 or 5 good games that Game Gear provided. Sonic the Hedgehog was obviously my favorite.
Sure.
And then you had third party. So, by then it was, all right, you like Mega Man's, you could play it on the Game Gear. You like Street Fighter, you could play it on the Game Gear. You like Mortal Kombat, you could play it on the Game Gear. It wasn't, Nintendo had a stringent, this is a story for another time, but they had a very stringent license agreement with their third-party vendors. I'm sure you know
Sure.
about this in the 1980s.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
And by 90, that was done. That had lapsed, and then it was fair game. So Sega made the most out of that. Game Gear was great. I thought graphically it was better than the Game Boy. The sound was better than the Game Boy. Obviously, you were playing with color and
Right.
a backlit screen. The one advantage that Game Boy had over, or 2 advantages, I should say, was their games. The library for the Game Boy was second to none. I mean, it was,
Right.
you really felt like you were playing a home console gaming experience in the car. And then the second big advantage that they had was battery. I mean,
Yeah.
batteries on my Game Boy, they would last for hours, whereas Game Gear, you were lucky if you got an hour and a half.
Really? That bad, huh?
Oh, they sucked.
man.
And Lynx was even worse. Lynx was even worse. I mean, I got that for my birthday. I'm a collector, as you know.
Right.
So yeah, I at that point I'm collecting systems, and portables were no different.
For sure. How many batteries did a Lynx take? Because I think the Game Boy took 4, the Game Gear took 6 AA's.
Correct. Good job.
What
And then-
what did the Lynx require?
It was a behemoth. That was 8.
No way. No way. 8. Golly. All right. Damn.
That was big. So yeah, but you needed 2 always, because obviously, I have a brother, you have a brother, and you couldn't hog the portable all to yourself. So I was a Sega guy. He liked the Game Gear too, though. So in the back seat, on our way to wherever destination we were going, I would have one, and my brother would have the other.
Gotcha. So you guys traded off. That's good. At least you each had one, as opposed to fighting over a single Game Boy, hovering over the monochrome screen, just trying to see what's going on.
Right,
Good.
right.
You missed the mushroom in Mario Land. Now, as anybody listening to the show may know, Sonic is a bit of a blind spot for me. It's a game that I never really grew up with. I never really played. I've never beaten a Sonic game in my life. So Sonic for me is just kind of outside my scope. But regardless, we're going to have a lot of Sonic content coming out over the next few weeks because people love that franchise and people love that character. Ryan from the Games with Coffee blog is a huge Sonic fan, and we'll be hearing a lot more from him further down the line. But today he tells us a bit about Sonic 2 on the Game Gear, not the Genesis, the Game Gear, and how it was a completely different game with a completely different set of almost unfair challenges.
Okay, take this. All right, when I was 7 years old, and I mentioned this early in the episode, when I was 7 years old, I got a Game Gear. I got Sonic 2 for it. I never beat Sonic 2, fully. I never got all the Chaos Emeralds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Sonic 2 for the Game Gear is notoriously difficult. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why it's hard. In comparison to the Master System version of the game, because of the aspect ratio of the Game Gear screen, you're actually kind of looking at it on a more zoomed in perspective versus the Master System version. So you don't have a lot of visual. You don't have a lot of visual room. In fact, Sonic's sprite on the Game Gear version of Sonic 2 is a little bit bigger than his Master System counterpart. So visually, you're able to see more on the Master System, but with the Game Gear, your visibility is not quite near zero, but it's enough that it affects the difficulty of the game tremendously.
Sure. Oh yeah,
Right.
and that's a game where you're already starved for information to do the next thing because you're going so fast. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Not only that too, but Sonic 2 for the Game Gear is notorious for being one of the hardest first boss levels of any game I've ever played.
Really?
Yeah, first boss is make or break for a lot of people. Like,
Wow. like a weed out level, huh?
yeah, pretty much. Like first, like because the let me set the scene here. So
Please.
when you're so the first zone is Underground Zone, which is complete 180 from like your typical Sonic game, because every Sonic game starts off with Sonic and then the lush green hill paradise with
Yep.
like hills and trees and stuff like that. Sonic 2 is like, bump that, we're gonna send you underground. So you're in an underground system on mine carts. There's lava all around you, rows and rows of spikes all over the place. So this thing is a screaming metal death trap when you start off. And then when you get to the boss acts, which for the earlier Sonic games, it was split into 3 acts. So you had first 2 acts were just regular levels, and then the third act would be the boss act. So in the third act, right, you're going through the level, you jump on the minecart, right before you get sent into the lava, you jump off, you land on a platform, head to the top. You're at the very top of the level right at this point right now. And there's a ramp that goes all the way down and launches you up, right? So they're thinking, okay, whatever. I'm gonna turn into a ball. I'm gonna roll down this hill here, launch up, and I'm gonna go to the next side. Except for the fact that you hit a wall midway through. Because there's a giant, like right at the end, there's a giant wall. There's nowhere to go. You're falling into the lava. And the next thing you know, Robotnik swoops up and like catches you, brings you back to the top of the level, and then drops you on this slope with an ant line.
wow.
I don't know if you know what an ant line is or anything. It's like a giant, like a giant ant, like a giant metal ant like contraption. And then on the top of the hill, you can't see it, but Robotnik is throwing down these silver bouncing balls, and they bounce at various heights and various speeds, and they come so fast that you have literally split seconds to react.
Forget that. Oh, forget that. That sounds horrifying.
Yeah, it's horrifying until you memorize how to do it, and then
Yeah, that's the key, right? That is definitely the key, I think, on that scenario. Yikes. Oh boy.
Yeah, I've actually become pretty prominent in speedrunning it, and if you reach that third act at a given time based on the in-game clock, you'll get the same pattern over and over and over again. Like it's consistent, like never changes. Yeah, so once you memorize that, it's like boom, the rest of the game is just like simple from there.
Yeah. Next up, Mike Elberton from the Games My Mom Found podcast shares a bit about his favorite Game Boy version and a random title that, just from the sound of it, seems damn near impossible, especially considering the original source material. Let's listen in. Were you a Game Boy kid at all? Or was that before your time a bit?
I do remember I had a Game Boy. The first Game Boy game that I remember, I had like the big brick, the big gray brick, but not for super long. I got the Game Boy Color, the lime green one is what I had, and I played a lot of like Pokemon Yellow, Pokemon Red, Blue, and a lot of Link's Awakening DX that we talked about on the show.
Yep. With the Game Boy Color, which color did you have?
Lime green.
Lime green. Very nice. Very nice. Very sedated, subdued, very just laid back type of color. Lime green. Very good. What else on the Game Boy? You mentioned another game.
Mainly the Pokemon games. And also, for some stupid reason, Kid Icarus 2, I had as a kid, it's not called Kid Icarus, A Myth and Monsters. I played a lot of that game, but never got past the first level.
Then you didn't play a lot of that game, sir. You just
I played a lot of it all the time. I just never got anywhere. I would always pick it up and try it. I just couldn't get anywhere.
What is this game? I didn't realize there's a Kid Icarus game for the original Game Boy.
Yeah, it's kind of like the same idea with Metroid and Metroid 2.
Okay.
And that it actually is considered a sequel. It's considered Kid Icarus 2. I didn't know it. It was just Kid Icarus for the Game Boy that I had, but I could never get anywhere. I never even scene, the second level, or anything. I could never beat the first area of the game.
Coming up, we continue the conversation with Mike Elberton about Link's Awakening, dive deep into that title, and then spend some time gabbing with my brother about all the things he and I loved about our Game Boy. All coming up after the break. Can't get enough of Mike Elberton? Of course you can't. So feed the need for more mics and listen to Games My Mom Found. Over 200 episodes covering games, movies, comics, and anything that comes to their maniacal minds. By the time you hear this, Michael, and I may finally be done with our MCU walkthrough. Just in time for Phase 4. I don't know about that. New episodes every Wednesday and Sunday on your pod player of choice. Games My Mom Found. Link's Awakening. Yeah, let's talk about Link's Awakening. How good is Link's Awakening?
My nostalgic memory of it was better than
I know.
memory is, but it was a game that I played a lot as a kid. But also, like when I was a kid, I had the whole aspect of it was a game that a friend of mine had, so we would talk about it off and on before the internet, and that's how we shared a lot of like different secrets of the game, and it made the game a lot more special to me.
It's always interesting when you get the chance to share a game with somebody, how it impacts you more. So, Link's Awakening, you were cool on it when we did our episode.
Unfortunately, yes. It didn't hit the same notes as it hit for me as a kid, which was a little bit kind of bummed me out. But again, that is how Games My Mom Found seems to work sometimes.
Yeah, no, definitely. What about it? Remind me, because again, for the benefit of those who haven't listened to the episode, if you haven't, you should. It's pretty good. I think it's a pretty
120 something.
Yeah, 120 something. Link's Awakening, definitely check it out. What about it didn't work for you this time around?
I think the quality of life. I'm missing things of that nature, and I'm just don't have the patience sometimes for how older games play. Sometimes it can just be a bad week where I have to play this game for the show this week because that's what I planned out months in advance. I'm just not in the right mood for it. So the game won't always be the best experience that it could be.
Yeah. It's interesting. That's a very interesting point, because I had played Link's Awakening, and it was for the first time for your show. And when I played it, I had actually played it like 6 months beforehand. So I played it on my own volition for funzos, and even then, a lot of that fetch quest stuff I just looked up. Like I don't, the seed goes to the monkey, and the monkey goes to the crocodile, and the crocodile gives you a thing that you have to hand to this person. It's like, oh boy, okay, I'm just gonna look this up and bounce along this map, interacting with charming characters and great music and everything else. Are you a little annoyed that Mike wasn't over the moon about his Link's Awakening experience, or his most recent Link's Awakening experience? Don't worry. Greg from the Level Zero podcast and I spend a lot of time gushing about this great Game Boy title. Oh, and there are spoilers galore in this segment of Link's Awakening. We basically spoil the ending. We talk about it. So if you want to avoid spoilers or haven't played it for yourself, skip ahead to 28:30 on this recording. Thanks. I mean, Link's Awakening is so good.
Oh gosh, yeah. I wanted to get right back to that, because that very much is that same like circle of I was a kid playing Super Nintendo. Also, I was playing Game Boy. And Link's Awakening is something very special. My quick ranking, I'll give you that: Ocarina of Time, then Link to the Past, then Link's Awakening. And it's just such a special game on the Game Boy there. The way that it like is a simpler version of Link to the Past, yet it's doing new things.
Yeah, it's so charming and sweet, but then gets really dark and very interesting and heady almost towards the middle and the end of that game. The themes in that are pretty staggering when you really kind of examine, like, oh, is Link just going to float on that thing forever? Was he really the dream of the windfish? Like, what is going on? Is
this real? Is this fake? Are you even the hero in this story?
Right.
I don't think you are. I don't think you're doing
I don't know if you are
here.
I don't think you're doing anything well. I think you're doing what most villains do, which is making important decisions with imperfect information.
Are you the bad guy in that game?
I think you kind of are.
Are we the baddies?
All those adorable little creatures all go away at the end, and you're just stuck on a barrel.
We saved Chain Chomp.
I know. Chain Chomp must live. He must survive.
We defeated the evil things in the dungeons, right?
And I'll be honest with you. I brought this up on another. I guessed on another podcast where we talked about Link's Awakening, and I played it for the first time 4 months ago.
What?
I had never played it as a kid. Yeah,
and it moved right up to your top 3.
Yep, immediately. Okay. I was like, oh yeah, no, I get this completely.
Which version?
And I played
did you play?
I played the DX version, the Game Boy. No, I didn't play the remake.
That is the right one to play. The Game Boy Color version of Link's Awakening is, I would argue, is by far the best version of that game.
Yeah, I played the Game Boy Color version, and yeah, immediately I was like, oh, I totally get why this is loved and beloved because people who like Link's Awakening love it. Like, they are over the moon about it.
Yeah.
But I even posited to the folks on the podcast I guested on that there's a little bit of Would You Kindly in that game too. Yeah. Would You Kindly being like BioShock style, the fallacy of player agency. You're just killing the bad guys because that's what the game says to do. Because that's what games are. Games is you go into dungeon, you find the thing, you find the weapon, you kill the bad guy. Because that's what games do. And you never really think about it too much until the one enemy at the end is like, hey, stop. If you do this, the entire island goes away. Like, everything disappears, including you.
Yeah,
Please think about what you're doing.
Right, and the owl is telling you, as you're playing the game, like, you maybe should not be doing this. Mm-hmm. And he's hinting the whole time, just, very much like that BioShock thing, where it's like, are you sure you should be doing this?
Yeah, because hey, gamer, you follow the arrow, you do what the character tells you to do. Mm-hmm. Do you really have agency in these games? Answer is probably not as much as you think you do. It's interesting, right? I found it way more interesting than just a cute little game with adorable characters and phenomenal music. Because music in that game is just
on my podcast, on the last 4 episodes, I did a insane deep dive where I think I lost my sanity in doing this, but I basically took a chunk out of my time to research the history and the development of every single Zelda game in the entire franchise. Despite me not having played all of them, I went through one at a time, and I found so many interesting things, from how connected everything in Zelda is into Mario, with the fact that it's just made by the same folks, to like what happened with Link's Awakening and why they went in this weird direction with Zelda when they were very clearly kind of going in a certain direction from after Link to the Past. So, if you're curious, I can tell you kind of more about Link's Awakening's development and kind of how that came to be.
Yeah, I mean, a quick breeze through would be pretty cool. Yeah.
So essentially, I'll be quick. So, I mean, there's 3 guys that are involved in the Legend of Zelda. Also the same 3 guys that are involved in Mario. And that's Miyamoto. Right. Everybody knows Miyamoto, but the other guy that you need to know is Takashi Tezuka. Takashi Tezuka is Miyamoto's right-hand man, and you can pretty much consider him like Luigi to Mario. Like, he doesn't get any recognition, but he's very much with him every step along the way. Like, the quote that I read was that Tezuka, if you had 3 people in the room, and one is Miyamoto and one is Tezuka, and they were told to, like, hey, pick one of these 3 things, those 2 would always pick the same thing. Always.
Wow.
But they also balanced each other out in a huge way. So with the Legend of Zelda series, Miyamoto was all about action and combat and gameplay, and Tezuka was like, we can make this a story. I think we could make this a big epic story, and Tezuka's the one that really came up with the whole like grand epic story of the Legend of Zelda. So they made the first game, and then the third person, sorry, just to go there, is Koji Kondo, the composer.
Gotcha. Yes.
And I mean, he created the overworld theme for Zelda in one day, which is insane. That's the biggest fact that I learned.
That's crazy.
He spent 1.5 years on the Mario theme song, which, of course, like, it's perfect. And then he turned around, and in less than 1 day, he made the overworld theme for Zelda.
Nuts.
Which is still being repeated in every game.
Yeah.
So what happened? So they made the first Zelda, they made the second Zelda, but not those 3, just Miyamoto, and then they made Link to the Past, and they actually had time on Link to the Past to make exactly the game that they wanted. So they spent a long time. Those three brainstormed. They got everything that they wanted, that they intended for the original game, and had full stories. And Koji Kondo actually had time to freaking write the soundtrack.
Wow.
Now, after that game was over, they were kind of moving in and looking at some different things, and they had already started on what eventually became Ocarina of Time. But what some other developers were doing is they were kind of goofing around with the Game Boy. And what they did with the Game Boy is they tried to take Link to the Past and throw it and see kind of what it would look like on the Game Boy. Could we make Zelda on the Game Boy? But they were doing this kind of like after hours as a side project. And Takashi Tezuka like looked over and was like, "What are you working on? That kind of looks like Zelda." And he was like, "Oh, well, just this little project. I'm just kind of seeing what the Game Boy can do. I got this Game Boy dev kit." And Tezuka got really excited about it and was like, "Wait a minute, we could do this." So he went and pitched to Nintendo, "Hey, could we make another game for the Game Boy? And could we make a Zelda game for the Game Boy?" And Nintendo was essentially like, "What do you need?" And he's like, "I don't know, another Game Boy dev kit." And they're like, "Great, here you go. Have fun."
Wow.
And so
nice.
And again, it was all after hours, but Takashi Tezuka, the right-hand man, Luigi, just led this project. And the original plan was just to port Link to the Past onto the Game Boy and figure out whatever they needed to do. There are not enough buttons, but you can figure it out. And they eventually just decided, hey, this is a Game Boy game. We don't think anybody's going to play this, really. Not as much as like people on Super Nintendo.
Sure.
Let's not worry about the story. Let's not worry about the lore, which they spent a long time on Link to the Past figuring out. Let's not worry about any of that stuff, and let's just make this game, and we can figure it out. It doesn't have to be tied to anything. And that's what they did. And that's why Link's Awakening is the weird side story.
It is interesting. Yeah, it sounds like they had a lot of autonomy. They just kind of did it.
Yeah.
And Nintendo just said, "All right, well, do what you want." You know, that's pretty cool.
And then
that gives a lot of its flavor and flair too. I can see how that being, because Link's Awakening has a very authorial style where it like you said, it's so different from any other game, even though it has the same look and feel and the bones are there, but it's got so much flavor.
Yeah. Exactly. And then because they got weird with it, they were absolutely, and then it was incredibly successful, almost more successful than Link to the Past, which is surprising. Between the two versions, it sold more than Link to the Past. Link's Awakening did. Yeah.
Interesting. Oh wow, I didn't even know that.
It's hard to compare when you've got more than one console release, but it did sell more combined copies than Link to the Past, or pretty dang close.
Wow.
And because that was so successful, they were not afraid to be weird with Ocarina of Time and then Majora's Mask, like get really weird with it. And
Super
it's
weird.
all because Link's Awakening was as successful as it was.
Next up, my brother and I talk about the games, the peripherals, and even the cheating methods we grew up with together as brothers in the same family, under the same roof, playing the same Game Boy. Let's listen in.
My real memories start when I first got my Game Boy, actually.
Oh, okay.
That was actually my first system, and I played the heck out of that.
That was like technically yours, if I remember.
It was, yeah, technically.
Yeah. Because there was ownership was assigned to all of these things, but it didn't really matter. But it mattered when we were kids.
Everything was shared.
It's my Game Boy. It's mine. What we had. Go ahead, bud.
Oh no, go ahead.
Now I was gonna say, what games from the Game Boy really? I mean, I know what the library is, but I'll leave it to you to talk about a little bit.
So definitely my earliest memories then, and like that really stuck with me, were probably playing Tetris on that machine, but also Super Mario Land, which I think is an often forgotten little Mario gem from that era.
It is a gem. It is a gem.
Yeah.
I love Mario Land. Every 6 months I'll pop it on and play it for like 20 minutes, like beat it in 20 minutes because it's a cakewalk. But it's such a fun little snack. I love it.
It's so, and Mario goes to Egypt. Like, it's just nothing like it.
Easter Island heads attack him. Like, it's amazing.
Yes. It's so different. I bet there's a story behind that. But
I'm sure, yeah. I'm sure.
And then my first, like, real favorite character would be Kirby.
Oh, yes.
Kirby was what my entry point into, like, Nintendo. I guess, like, the first character I really paid attention to. And then it all kind of blurs from there. And then eventually you got a Super Nintendo, I think, in Christmas of '93.
Yes.
Yeah. And then that ushered in a whole nother extra era.
Right, yeah, because I remember you were whenever I think of your entry point, I forget about Game Boy. I think Super Nintendo.
Yeah. The same reason I love my Walkman, which was just the ability to bring entertainment with you on, like, family dinners or trips in the car, and immediately you just the ability to play the game anywhere. And if you were tying up the Nintendo, it was a perfect option to play like somewhere else in my bedroom, And if I was visiting family and there was like quiet time, I'm just like, oh, perfect. Predates, like, think of your cell phone today with Candy Crush. That's what the Game Boy was for any of us in the early 90s.
No, I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. It was awesome to just, at least have it anywhere, especially like long car trips. In the midst of doing the Game Boy episode, which I'm putting together now, actually, I mentioned our long trips to the Poconos.
Yeah,
the car trips to the
Poconos.
Was
very helpful. Yeah.
Oh man, that was vital. And as far as accessories, we had a battery pack.
We had the rechargeable battery pack, which blows my mind because it has, this predates like lithium-ion batteries. So you just charge it and you had to time it yourself. You had to time it for 6 hours, and I never had the guts to go farther.
No.
Lithium ion, it either slows down towards 99% or it has like a time element. But this was just a brick that you plug into the wall. But it was
battery
very
brick.
handy. Yeah. And it's funny because unlike when the AA's die, when the brick would die, the Game Boy would keep holding on like on life support, so it would start to phase a little, and the audio would start to crumble a little bit, and Tetris is dun 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 dun. Oh, like, I guess I'm done.
It's like wheezing.
But it also, it's wheezing, it's coughing, but it also works as an AC adapter too, so you can just plug it into the wall.
Oh, that's right.
Stay tethered to your wall until you get some batteries.
I have guests who said they had battery packs with car chargers, like the little cigarette lighter
That's
things.
Cool.
That is cool.
Those definitely existed, yeah. And also another piece of trivia is that the original Game Boy was not backlit.
Right.
So it was only a green and black color scheme. So you kind of had like play into the sun or sort of with light behind you, but in the dark it was almost impossible. So there did exist a third-party light that you'd kind of slide in across the screen, and it would create lights on the side. And it totally worked. It would like point these little LEDs towards the screen on the side. And that was a huge game changer. So I could play the Game Boy at night when we're driving back from the Poconos.
Exactly. Yeah, those things ate up batteries pretty bad though. Those lights. Considering they were just like, I don't know if they were LEDs at the time, but I am assuming so. Yeah, probably.
I think so. It took its own 4 batteries on top of it.
Yes. 4 batteries. That's right.
4 for the light, 4 for the Game Boy. Yeah.
We're just going on trips with just clunking around with batteries in the bag just for our Game Boy. And we had the little carrying case. I remember that. A little carrying case for everything. Had everything, even to this day, if it's portable, it has a carrying case. I like cases. Yeah. It must have a case.
I still have my Indiana Jones bag, or whatever. It's black, but it's not tan. But it's it's got a shoulder strap that you can, like a purse almost. Yeah.
I think those are the only 2 we really had. Oh, of course, the Game Genie. We had a Game Boy Game Genie. I know that for a fact.
We had a Game Genie for every system.
Yes, we did. Yeah. Yes, we did.
Yeah, interesting.
You got to cheat everywhere.
We like to cheat. It really was like unlocking your game. It was very exciting. And then Game Shark was later, but we had that too.
Did we have a Game Shark? Oh, we did for the
N64.
Yeah. That's cool. No, I love my enduring memory of the Game Genie for Game Boy was the little code book that was in there. The little tiny itty bitty code book, and had a door.
And it had a compartment for it. Yeah.
It had a door in the Game Genie that you can keep your little tiny, spy code book.
Absolutely.
For that. Yep. Cool. Game Boy was awesome, man. Did we have any other weird ones? I mean, we had all the classics. Of course, Mario Land, Kirby's Dream Land, Kirby's Pinball, a game I still play.
Was great.
Oh, what a great game! I still play Kirby's Pinball.
Yep. I borrowed Metroid 2, which is what was the name of it? Return to Samus, maybe?
Yep. Return of Samus.
Is that it?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good game. That was my friend Andre's copy. And then trying to remember. Oh, Jurassic Park. That was a weird one.
Wait a minute. Oh, we own that?
We owned the Game Boy version. We also would rent the Super Nintendo version.
Right. I remember renting the Super Nintendo. I don't remember anything about the Game Boy version.
Yeah. It's the same game, but like ported to Game Boy and little stripped down. Good game, actually. A little underrated, I think. But, not great, but good,
Yeah, I have the power of the internet. I just want to see a image. I do remember this. Yeah, it was like a stripped down version of the actual Super Nintendo game.
The goofy T-Rex's mouth would open as the menu was there. I remember that.
always classic. Very good. And that just about does it for round 2 of our Game Boy travels. Time to take the brick, take out the batteries, put them back into the remotes and the smoke detectors, put away all the accessories, and put this lovely little handheld to bed until next time. Because the way this show is going, there could be a next time. And that's what's so fun about doing this is, who knows? In another couple of months, we may be doing a round 3. There's that much love for this amazing little handheld. Thank you so much for checking out the show. If you like this and you want to hear more, we are available on every podcatcher out there. If you want to help support the show, please check us out on Twitter at @AGamerLooksAt40. Ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts are hugely important. Please take a moment to do so and tell a friend. It's a small community here that we'd love to make just a little bit bigger, and you are vital in doing that. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker, and thank you so much for listening to A Gamer Looks at 40.